It is no easy thing to make sense of the world today. We live in a time where just trying to put one foot in front of the other can be both difficult and confusing. So many of the categories, things that were once considered normal, relationships like parent and child, man and woman, understandings of race and nationality, identity itself, these things are changing fast in our culture, faster than we can even make sense of or keep up with. Who am I? That's the perennial question of our culture. Of course, that doesn't mean there's no answer. Christianity does give us answers. God has made known to us not only who He is, but who He's made us to be. And that's why I want you to join us May 21st to the 23rd for the Wilberforce weekend. Join all of us at the Colson Center in an exploration of what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God. The event is being held at the stunning Omni Resort in Fort Worth, Texas. You can engage speakers who are both thinkers and doers, that are writers and laborers, teachers and preachers. And we've called all of these folks together to help us frame out the answers to this perennially important question. Well, we're getting closer and closer to the Wilberforce weekend coming up in May in Fort Worth, Texas. And one of the unique aspects of this conference is an intensive that we launch each event with. On this year, it'll be on that Friday, May 21st. And as we spend the entire weekend looking at the image of God, we're going to double down on one aspect of what it means to be made in the image of God that is most culturally controversial right now. And you might even say is the source of so many of our cultural ills, and that is the idea of male and female. That's very clear language right there in Genesis when God talks about being made in the image of God. Genesis 1:27, in fact, male and female, He created them. A big part of that intensive on the male and female parts of being made in the image of God, or the male and female aspects of being made in the image of God, is my guest here, just now a good friend, someone who you have heard before on the Breakpoint podcast. You've heard us quoted. Quote him and his work. He's got the most recently banned book, I think, in American history. I don't know if there's been another one more recently than Dr. Ryan Anderson's book, When Harry Became Sally. But Ryan, it's always good to see you, my friend, and good to have you here for this conversation.
Yeah, glad to be with you.
So this idea of male and female has gone in a generation from being seen as built into our lives, our bodies, even our societies, to seemingly being up for grabs, and to be considered as a social construct. I mean, things that were unthinkable on this level just a generation ago are today unquestionable, as you found out when Amazon decided to drop your book because you questioned it.
Yep.
I mean, look, how did this happen? What's the depth of this generational or this change from one generation to the next?
Sure. I mean, so the question's exactly right. And that's actually that gets to the title of the book. Some people think, oh, it's too cutesy. It's actually meant to make a serious point. Just a generation ago, when Harry met Sally, the entire premise of the movie was that, men and women are so different, they can't just be friends, that the sexual tension will always be there. And now a generation later, the idea is that, male and female are fluid, interchangeable concepts that exist along a spectrum, right? I mean, upside down the thinking. In terms of what the roots are, I mean, some of this goes back maybe 500 to 600 years. I mean, we can talk about nominalism, we can talk about voluntarism, we can talk about the rise of the therapeutic self. And I know one of the other speakers at Wilberforce weekend is going to be giving you some of that. I like to, if those are the remote causes, right? We can talk about Occam, we can talk about Duns Scotus, right? Some of the long ago causes, some of the medium term causes with people like Rousseau, like Marx, like Nietzsche, right? I think the proximate causes, I would point to three things. One is technology. It was only within the past 50 to 100 years that we had synthetic testosterone, synthetic estrogen, the ability to do the types of puberty-blocking drugs, right? The ability to do the technical interventions on a body to feminize a male body or masculinize a female body. So one's technological. I think one is ideological. And I think this largely, the proximate ideology roots are in the sexual revolution. And it's in a certain vision of freedom of I should be able to do with my body whatever I want to do, so long as it doesn't harm another person that matters. And the that matters parts is important because abortion, so long as it doesn't harm another person. Right? Oh, unborn babies aren't people that matter. The hookup culture, I can do sexually with my body whatever I want to do with my body, so long as it's consensual. Right? Consent is the only thing. And then most recently would be, well, I can do with my own body whatever I want to do with my body. So I think it's a technology part. I think it's a ideology part. And then I also think it's a political part. And what I mean by this is that the acronym was always LGBT. And I would imagine that the vast majority of our listeners hadn't really ever thought about the T until about 5 years ago, when Bruce Jenner, back when he was called Bruce, won on 2020 for the 2-hour special. And then a couple months later, Anthony Kennedy redefined marriage for the nation. And then you had all of these gay marriage groups who always had the LGBT, or at least recently. Some of them didn't have the T. They had to rename themselves because they had forgotten part of their acronym. They pivoted. And they pivoted from the LGB to the T. And they said, all right, if gay rights were the human rights issue of our generation, now trans rights are the human rights issue of our generation. And that's a loose paraphrase from President Biden. I don't think President Biden has thought about gender dysphoria and gender identity conflicts for more than 5 minutes. I think he just knows that, look, I was an ally when it came to gay marriage, so I'm going to be an ally when it comes to trans rights, right? I was in favor of gay rights, so I'm in favor of trans rights. And so I don't think we should downplay the political part of this. This isn't coming from a lot of people who, thought deeply about this. It's people who just want to be on the, quote, right side of history. And when you put those three things together, the technology, the ideology, and the politics, I think that explains a lot about our current cultural moment.
It's an incredible amount of cultural momentum, behind all of those things. I mean, some of these changes just weren't thinkable until these technological changes, which now, of course, have hit a whole new level of possibility. But I also want to just talk about this relational aspect of it, because the thing you're going to be covering with us is just why this understanding of male and female is literally built into the human experience. Now, as a natural law theorist, Ryan, I know you would point, for example, to the human body as being really general revelation, God telling us about the world. So if our bodies are made by this, we ought not pretend in some kind of neo-Gnostic sort of way that bodies don't matter. But we also pretend, at a whole new level with the T added to the acronym, that what I do with my body doesn't impact anybody else, that it actually doesn't change things. I know that's not true just within my own family, watching a family member process losing, essentially their child because of this child embracing and taking on a new identity. And for us, it's just, for many people, it's just a name. But if you're the mom, you didn't raise this other person. You raised the kid that you raised. Does that make sense? And that's when I first started to see this relational aspect of male and female that it just put to the lie this idea that, how's my transition going to hurt you? How is it going to affect you if I live into my true self, or any of the other language? And it's baked into the world on that relational scale. How does it impact society at large?
Oh my gosh, sure. I mean, so the general way that I like to start in explaining this is just to explain kind of like the teleology of almost like the vocation that our sex body empowers us to have, equips us to have, enables us to have. Why are we male and female? It's so that boy can grow up to be a man, to one day be a husband, to one day be a father, right? That girl can grow up to be a woman, to one day be a wife, to one day be a mother, right? And those are certain vocations. I have a vocation to be a husband. I have a vocation to be a father. And being, 30-some years ago, a boy, and then, however many years after that, a man, right, are what kind of enabled me, equipped me, empowered me to fulfill this trajectory, this vocational trajectory. to my mind, like that's the most important foundational aspect of why are we male and female. It's not about, who's a lawyer and who's a paralegal, or, who's a doctor and who's a nurse, right? Different societies, the men are from Mars, women from Venus thing, they can over accentuate the differences between male and female. They can distort the differences. And then sometimes societies, the pendulum swings in the other direction and they downplay them, right? They embrace androgyny, where equality equals sameness. The Aristotelian mean between those two extremes is to say, all right, what are the differences that make a difference and where do they make a difference? And it strikes me that the place where they make the biggest difference is precisely in marriage and family life. That's why we each have half of a reproductive system. I mean, that's the reality. When we talk about the sexual reproductive system, it's a single system that's distributed across two different sexed bodies. So that when a man and a woman unite as one flesh, right, they unify as one flesh because they're the two halves of the reproductive system form a whole, which then will explain, where babies come from. And then that child now has a web of relationships to that child's mother and father, to aunts and uncles, to grandparents. I mean, this is what it's all about, which is why it's not surprising to me that right after we redefine marriage, we move on to redefine sex and gender. There's a certain sense in which the LGBT acronym does hang together. There's another sense in which the T is unlike the L, G, and B, right? And so some people accentuate the tensions there, but there's also a underlying philosophical foundation where it makes sense that if you can't even acknowledge where our embodiment as male and female makes the biggest difference for marriage and family life, then it is culturally going to be, then maybe it is just all kind of like silly putty. It's all just raw matter that the will can manipulate to serve its own purposes.
Sorry, you got me thinking there. Hold on.
Let's go.
I went off on a little rabbit trail there based on something that you said, and I just got distracted there.
Supposed to get your listeners thinking, right? Isn't that the point of this?
Well, it is, and that's what's I think so astonishing for so many people is that we don't. The fact that this could in fact be thinkable. I just finished a commentary that will air on Breakpoint here in the next day or so about this. Story that came out of the California prisons offering, basically a transfer to any male wanting to identify as female. And immediately, just since January, 200 males have requested a transfer and no one has been denied. And, as one warden put it, we're going to have to build more maternity wards in these prisons. There's just this, no matter what you can say, this gendered reality or this binary reality is actually part of who we are. And yet it really does seem like people want to pretend like it doesn't exist. Like, because I want to have these identity claims and I want other people to have the right to be who, they want to be, that, the realities of testosterone and estrogen and the realities of having two parts of a reproductive system that, and urges and biological strength, in general with men over women, that this stuff will somehow just stop existing. I mean, that's the most kind of incoherent part of it all, is that these realities remain.
That's exactly right. And so, I had focused on the marriage question kind of as being the foundational, but you just hit on like a half dozen other ways that it matters, right? It matters for safety. Right? If you're a female prisoner, you don't want a male prisoner who, quote, identifies as a woman sharing your, jail cell. It matters for true equality, right? Because equality doesn't mean sameness. Equality means that if we have an NBA, we should also have a WNBA, right? An androgynous basketball association wouldn't end up well. And so we have an NBA, we have a WNBA, and that's actually how we respect equality. It's by taking the differences that make a difference seriously. There's also an ideology part here that matters, because what we're trading on are stereotypes. And sometimes it's, vicious stereotypes. It's why you have many feminists speaking out against transgender ideology, Because they say what it is you take all of the stereotypical aspects of, quote, what it is to feel like a woman. And then when Bruce became Caitlin, the picture for Vanity Fair, it's like high heels, cleavage, and like bright red lipsticks, like that type of a thing. That, why not say it's perfectly fine for boys to like dolls and girls to like football, right? It doesn't mean that you're a girl trapped in a boy's body or a boy trapped in a girl's body. So there are a variety of ways in which you could think about how, if we ignore these kind of inbuilt truths, it's going to be causing harm to people, right? It's going to be a failure to flourish for those individuals themselves, but then for like a whole nested network, an ecosystem of all of the people that we are in relation with.
Yeah. One of the things about the athletics things that I've just realized is, and this hit me as I was reading a story about Megan Rapinoe, I can't remember if it's an H or an N right there, but a U.S. women's professional soccer player talking about, I've played with transgender athletes and, they were some of my best teammates. And it was interesting because she was referring to biological females who identified as males and still played on the female soccer team. Universally, you don't have a flurry of female athletes trying to make the NBA.
You'll also notice in the prison example that you mentioned, it was 225 men who had asked to transfer to women's jail. It was only 6 females who had asked to be
because even if a
male.
biological female identifies as a male, they're not going to put themselves at that situation of physical risk, right? Yeah. I mean, and if you're an athlete who's a female who wants to dress in a suit or, wear jeans and have short hair or express yourself male, you don't have a chance to actually make any kind of competitive male team at the same level that you're competing against females. So we have examples of women, biological women identifying as male and competing on female teams. You don't have any examples of females trying to compete against men by and large. There's a couple exceptions here and there. It all goes the other way, where biological men competing against women. That's a natural law revelation right there, isn't it? I mean, that's telling us an awful lot about what is.
Well, and what it really does is it highlights why do we have separate facilities and
in the first place, right? Place,
right. I mean, it really forces you to answer the question. Either we should have separate programs and facilities based on objective biology, or we should just get rid of them. But doing them based on subjective identity makes no sense, right? Like, it doesn't make sense to say the reason we have separate athletic competitions is for people who subjectively identify in different ways. No, the reason we have different athletic competitions is because there are physical differences that make a difference for physical competition. Otherwise, we would just have everything be co-ed, right? Every sports program would be co-ed if there really isn't, quote, a difference between a trans woman and a woman. And I'll just add, I don't like, in my own speaking, saying biological male, because it opens up the door to suggesting that there's some other type of male. Right. I mean, so I think like that is already a concession to the ideology that's being promoted by the radicals here. Is that, there are 2 different types of men, biological men, and then, the other type. And it's like, well, no, there are men and there are women. Unfortunately, some men identify as women, but that doesn't make them, an actual woman. Right. So, I mean, that's just to say there, like I think sometimes we have to speak that way just for clarity's sake. But I think we should always be aware of when like we're being forced to add modifiers to. This is also why I hated whenever someone would force me to say traditional marriage. And it's like, no, there's only marriage. And because you guys are trying to redefine what marriage is, you're now forcing me to use that modifier as if they're different types of marriage, right?
I tell you, Ryan, one of the reasons this is, what folks are hearing is the main reason I think they should come to Wilberforce Weekend and be a part of this event. You do a wonderful job Though your beliefs are firmly grounded in revealed truth in Scripture, realizing that Scripture describes the world as it actually is. What we know to be true from scriptural truth is because it corresponds to reality. That means we can make, as Chuck Colson said, prudential arguments. We can actually talk about this. The other reason I really wanted people to hear from you, and I just want you to, this will be our last question here, is because a lot of people look at this issue, all these issues, but all these kind of related issues, but specifically this issue, as if it's a lost cause, as if there's not, any ground to kind of continue to argue for. For some, that means, look, it's just over, kind of a hopelessness. For others, it is, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to, share the gospel, or I'm just going to, do my charity work. But, in other words, this isn't worth doing. And this isn't worth talking about. And that's one of the reasons I know you haven't given up hope that, first of all, that this ideology runs counter to reality. So eventually gravity is going to win. But secondly, there's still a possibility for us to appeal to the masses. Could you talk a little bit about why kind of all hope is not lost on this issue?
Yeah, because thankfully, this issue has not been divided purely on either partisan grounds or theological grounds. And what I mean by this is that you have people like J.K. Rowling and Andrew Sullivan, who wouldn't agree with you or me on many other issues of both theology and politics, but they agree with us on many aspects of the gender identity question. Not all of the aspects, but to my mind, they are much more reasonable when it comes to some of the gender identity questions than any current national office holder for the Democratic Party, right? Because they have fallen more or less lockstep into a certain political vision. And again, not because they've thought about it, but because that's what politics is demanding of them. And I think that the activist class is just out of step with ordinary Americans. And I don't think you need to be particularly conservative or particularly religious to not want to have a boy in your daughter's bathroom, regardless of how that boy identifies. To not want your daughter losing athletic competitions to a boy who identifies as a girl. And I think if you really get people to be honest, no one wants their daughter to have a double mastectomy in order to identify as a boy. I think if you really get people to be honest, they want their daughter to feel comfortable as the girl that she is. And I don't think you need to be religious or conservative for that. And so I think it would be a tragic mistake if Christians refused their prophetic calling and bearing witness to the truth, right? I mean, if other people are willing, and I have some secular friends who don't agree with me on anything else theologically or politically, who are staking their lives, their careers, their livelihood on speaking out against transgender ideology. If they're willing to do it, but Christians are unwilling to do it, right? People who have hope for the afterlife, who have hope that the judgment that matters most isn't the judgment of history, but the judgment of Christ. I mean, what is that saying about our own kind of willingness to bear our cross? And right, in our culture, not everyone has to do what you and I do professionally, but we are called to carry a cross, and it might be bearing witness to a countercultural but true vision of the human person.
Yeah. And we think we can sit it out, just give yourself 5 minutes, and it's coming to a school, a sports team, a home near you.
So even just from self-interest, right? If all you care about is protecting, your family, your school, your church, you might not care about the culture war, but it cares about you. But hopefully even beyond self-interest, the way that we love our neighbors is by bearing witness to the truth.
Including our neighbors who identify as transgender. I mean, that's what's hard, because we have a definition of love, and we'll be talking about this over the weekend as well. That's just so squishy, that basically is relabeled affirmation. And that's not love. I mean, it's cruel to tell someone who's not okay that they are. It's cruel to let someone live in a delusion in which they hate their own bodies and seek medical intervention. In a sense that, to the extent really that it will cause permanent damage, permanent, infertility, or even a permanent wound that will never heal. And all of this is part of the, kind of where this thing leads. You talked about the teleology of the human person. You talk about the teleology, where all of this thing is intended to go, where it will end as far as for endorsing a transgender way of seeing who you are. It's not loving. It's not loving to get behind that. My guest, Dr. Ryan Anderson, president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. I forgot to mention that. Just mentioned he's the author of When Harry Became Sally, but we'll give you a good formal, holistic introduction at Wilberforce weekend. Again, May 20th through the 22nd. Very much looking forward to having you with us. May 21st is when Ryan will speak on Friday at our intensive on Image of God, male and female. So we hope you can join us. Ryan, good to see you. We'll see you in Fort Worth. Wilberforce Weekend has always been and is about equipping Christians, equipping you with the clarity, confidence, and courage you need to live out what is true in this cultural moment. The Colson Center is also offering the Wilberforce Weekend online. This is a virtual conference that will be released in the month of June. You can engage with the entire content of the Wilberforce Weekend from your own home. And better yet, we'll have special sessions that are online only, that will only be specifically for the virtual attendees. Join us at the Wilberforce Weekend, and let's work together on what it means to get the image of God right and to join in God's restoring work.